Hey, everybody. I'm Robb Ryerse, Political Director of Vote Common Good, and want to welcome you to the Common Good Candidates podcast. This is where we have conversations with the extraordinary, ordinary Americans who are saving our democracy by giving us a choice and running for office. And today you get to listen in on a conversation with David Kim, who is running for the United States House of Representatives in California's 34th Congressional District, basically Los Angeles. David, my friend, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, Rob. And yes, you are correct, Central Los Angeles.
Yeah. Okay, so David, let's begin with the end in mind. It's November 6th. What have you accomplished? What are you proud of? How are you feeling?
November 6th, the results have not been certified yet. Ballots are still being counted, facing the reality that here, based on previous cycle, the counting will probably take 3 weeks until they declare who the winners in our races. But November 6th, we would have accomplished a lot in terms of planting seeds, watering those seeds that we have been in our constituents' hearts and minds for this cycle, for the previous cycle, really standing up for the right positions in terms of what's happening in the world today, whether it be what's happening at the border, what's happening in Gaza, Palestine, what's happening here domestically, and really accomplishing a lot in terms of realigning, reawakening, having people reimagine what could be possible if we were to dismantle, well, okay, maybe that might be too powerful of a word, but if we were to move away from this corporate-centered politics systems that we have. So yeah, by then we would have accomplished a lot in terms of really riling up people's spirits and hearts and minds about how the world is operating today.
Yeah. Now, you used a phrase, our corporate-centered politics. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, when I say corporate-centered politics, Rob, unfortunately, our politics and government in DC, although they're supposed to be legislating, co-governing, representing our values as constituents in every one of the 435 districts, unfortunately, that's not the case. Based on what's happened in the past 50 years of politics in DC, where you have the death of the pension in the 70s, where you have corporations and big companies who used to have their utmost loyalty and priority of caring for their workers and their families and their welfare and benefits, now cutting corners at all costs because their focus and shift became from their workers to their shareholders. How do we maximize profit at all costs? And with that being said, that's where they began really lobbying hardcore in terms of the politics that is in DC. And so just of how the system is set up, even to have time, even to have the resources to fly out, to meet with Congress members, to push for certain policies or legislation to happen, you need to have money. And it's corporations and companies that have that money. And so for the past 50 years, we've had politics where despite the people who are electing these members to Congress, it's actually the corporate PACs, the special interest money, the lobbyists that are actually getting these Congress members reelected by the amounts of money that is poured into their campaigns to get them reelected, because there's just millions poured in so that it's impossible for any new challenger to come along. And so we've had this status quo politics happen where it's a tradition, it's a club that nobody can get into. And so now we have all across the US, both this cycle and previous cycles, ordinary Americans like myself running because we're tired of this politics and system being centered on special interests.
Yeah. And it's not a Republican only kind of issue, right? You are, people might be interested in this. You are a Democrat who is running against a Democrat. And part of that is California's system in the primary. It's not a party primary system. it's a top two. So whoever the top two vote getters are in the primary go on to the general election, even if they're in the same party. That being said, you are challenging an incumbent Democrat in this election. So this isn't a seat that would flip from Republican to Democrat. It would flip from corporate Democrat to someone who's a Democrat who's loyal to the people. I don't like how. Talk to us about like what it's like running against another Democrat and why our listeners shouldn't be freaked out by that.
Yeah, I know that some have this conception of vote blue no matter who, but unfortunately, given the state of politics that we have right now, vote blue no matter who doesn't really cut it because although we have the Democratic Party that claims to be the working class party, if you follow the money, a lot of these Democrats, a majority of these Democrats are actually funded by corporate PACs, special interests, and they say one thing, yet their actions or their lack of actions are completely the opposite. And you're right to say that in California, we have a top two jungle primary system where instead of having to win in your own party in the primary and then advancing to the general, here in California, regardless of party, it's just the top two candidates that from the primary election that advance to the general. And so we have a situation where I myself am running against the current incumbent. And in the beginning, this is not my first rodeo. I've run before against this Congress member. We came really close last cycle, November 2022. We won 49% of the general election votes out of 121,000 votes. We only lost by 3,000 votes. And in that cycle and the cycle before, it was definitely a bit challenging to inform and educate voters and constituents about the difference between voting for a corporate funded Democrat and a grassroots 100% people funded Democrat, and the distinctions in that and the consequences and what that means. Do you want to continue reelecting these corporate Democrats where we've had status quo politics? In the sense of during the past 50 years, there's been a transfer of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% to the top 10%. And now the norm for many people is working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And in a district like ours, our district is the top 20 poorest congressional districts out of the 435 in the country. We're the fourth poorest congressional district in California of 52 congressional districts. And so with that being said, why are we re-electing the same leaders if life continues to get worse and worse? Obviously, something's not happening correctly for the people. And so I think just even without getting into the semantics and into the nitty gritty of the nuances and distinctions of that, I think just even taking a step back, what's happening shouldn't continue. These people who got us into this mess can't continue to be reelected. And so we really do need people from the community running.
Yeah. And I think there's probably some of us who think that we are fighting for democracy and it's a war that has more than one front. And so we absolutely oppose Donald Trump and the fascism that he represents and the MAGA extremists and all of that. And at the same time, the corporate money in politics approach is also that cuts off, regular people's ability to run for office and to persuade and lobby their Congress people and sets up the whole system against them. That's a threat to democracy too, that needs to be addressed. And we've got to be able to walk and chew gum, right? And I feel like your campaign represents that, like, hey, we can handle more than one thing at the same time.
Indeed, and I feel that because of the corporate stronghold that we have in Washington, which eventually trickles down over the entire country, where this idea of a trickle-down politics, a trickle-down economy hasn't really worked at all. And it's this sense of, and for those who are hearing this term for the first time, it's this idea that if the government so long as takes care of these corporate and special interests by giving out billions and millions of dollars to these corporations, they in turn will take care of their employees, and the effects and benefits of that will trickle down. However, that's not the case.
Yeah.
We've seen an increasing wealth disparity. We've seen increasing income disparity like no other. And because of that, we see this Democratic Party being even corporate centered, just as the Republican Party is. And with that being said, also being a part and enabling what's going on with our current election as well. We wouldn't be in a situation where we have another Biden Trump rematch. And that's only because right now people don't know the distinction between the Democratic and Republican parties because they're both not serving the people. And so, with that being said, a candidate like Trump becomes the viable candidate. But let's say if we had a Democratic Party that was more people centered, that was really centered in the people, then there would be a huge, clear distinction and an obvious awareness of who to vote for, and that person would not be Trump. However, because we don't have that distinction right now, we've sort of enabled all of this to happen.
So interesting to hear your perspective on all of this. So, David, this isn't your first time running for office. You've done it before. You came, just heart-wrenchingly close 2 years ago. Now you're doing it again. But this isn't like your full-time job. Like you work as a lawyer, but you're not one of those like fancy rich lawyers we see on TV. You're like doing the hard work every day of representing people in need. I'm curious, you tell us a little bit about your day job, and then how does that both impact running for office in terms of how you feel and what you think about people, and also just on you personally, like trying to balance lawyering and campaigning.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm actually at my workplace right now doing this podcast interview
Yeah, I
because
love it.
I didn't have time to drive home and then come back, and I have a
Totally.
mandatory work lunch here too. And my apologies for the sound, the extra sound. My
No,
boss
I
was actually
love it.
standing right outside my cubicle, so I couldn't tell him to move. But yeah, so for those who aren't aware, I'm a public children's court attorney for parents in children's court. I represent and defend parents, the most vulnerable parents and families of Los Angeles County, and from having their children removed from them, from being adopted, and really being their advocate, and fighting for their custody rights of their children, and getting them back, and ensuring that these parents and families do have the services and resources they need to be empowered, because right now a lot of these families are being punished for being poor, for not having resources, when instead we should be doing the opposite, which is empowering and giving them and connecting them with resources. And so I guess in a nutshell, for those who aren't really aware of the system, it's sort of like a public defender but on the children's court side, in a way.
Yeah.
And in
And
terms of
how's that impacted both like how you view why you're campaigning, but then also what's it like campaigning while you're doing a full-time job?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of it's because I'm in children's court every single day in the morning. I'm talking with these parents every single day. I'm still grounded and rooted in terms of why I'm running, why we're doing this work, and obviously there's other legislation connected to my current day job, whether it be the Adoption Safe Families Act that was passed in the 90s that we really need to repeal and if not amend, and introduce new legislation that could help empower families instead of dividing them. It just it gives me that extra fire, I guess, when you say when I go out and speak to people on the campaign trail, and talk about what we're fighting for and what we're standing for, and I incorporate anonymously the stories of the families and clients that I represent on a daily basis. And so that's really led our campaign to continually be people centered while still engaging with constituents and co-governing with them. And then on a personal level, it is a bit taxing.
Yeah.
burdening in terms of there's only 24 hours in a day. Unfortunately, I don't have the luxury to quit my job and to run full time and campaign, given that we're already having the challenge of going up against a corporate incumbent. But So I don't have that luxury, and so I'm working full time in children's court, 40 plus hours a week, and then I'm also campaigning in between and night and evenings and weekends when I do have that moment and ability to do so. Um, and I know it's hard and difficult sometimes, but given what we've accomplished thus far with being so close at winning the election last cycle, and the seeds we've planted and what's happening across the country right now, I think it's important. And that's why we're in it to win it this time. And that's
Yeah.
why we threw our towel into the race again.
Yeah. So when people think of LA, they think Hollywood, they think celebrities, maybe they think the Dodgers. Like what's something about LA that people don't know and that they should know?
Well, I think a lot of people, if you haven't been to LA, you probably think of it as the glamorous beaches, nice weather, all of that, which you kind of just mentioned, and some of it could be true to some extent, depending on what world and you live in here, because there's multiple worlds here that you live in. But for the most part, when people land foot in LA, they immediately see the poverty everywhere, where
Mm,
there's tents and people are living on the streets, unhoused, and where you can clearly see that people are struggling. And Los Angeles isn't the great kind of entertainment capital where everybody's living a perfect life. It's not. That's just a facade, and that's probably just 1% of what LA is like. And in LA, we have so many different communities, so many different minority communities, immigrant communities that aren't being represented and heard. And so now it's time to really have them co-govern with us in Washington, D.C.
yeah. David, you spent a couple of days with the Vote Common Good team and some other candidates running for Congress along the Mexican border, and we did a little border trip together, and you were a part of that. What did you like? How did that inform kind of how you think about the immigration issue, which I know you got some history with? You used to be an immigration lawyer. But how did that help shape and formulate how you think about what needs to be done related to immigration, having seen it with your own eyes?
There's definitely, I mean, I've had, as you've briefly referenced, I did work as an immigration defense attorney in federal court, defending undocumented individuals and families, and really advocating for their right to be human, to be here, and to have a place that they can call home. It's one thing though to argue that and to present that in front of a immigration court judge, and then versus going down to the actual border and seeing what's happening down there, and hearing more firsthand directly, more and relatively closer in time, because these families and individuals who are at the border just escaped almost being killed, almost being tortured, or to whatever degree it may be, and it's still fresh in their minds. And just to hear their stories, to talk with them, um, to be with them and to spend time with them really opened up my eyes, my heart, in terms of having deeper context and a deeper conviction that what's happening down there isn't right, and that the U.S. has been complicit in international policies related to immigration and economic policies in South America and Central America, and more specifically with Mexico. And there at the border trip, we learned about how the U.S. played a big role in that, with really with the tariffs, with the economy, with having the farmers lose their substances down there in Mexico, and really playing their part in damaging the economy down there, which has led into a result of a lot of um, individuals and families trying to cross Mexico into the U.S. because the conditions in Central America and South America have gone so bad, and the U.S. has played a role in that. But yet, instead of realizing and being aware of that, and wanting to upgrade and see where we can help improve our immigration policies, whether it be the racist-based quota system or what have you, there's been no move on that. It's rather been no. Let's stick to what we've had for decades, and let's actually double down and build even higher walls. And there at the border trip, we saw the 12-foot walls, 17-foot walls, 30-foot walls that were installed by different presidents, both Republican and Democrat, in the past 2 decades, and the mesh wire and all of that being added, and it's just inhumane, and it's something that shouldn't be done, and so after seeing all of that, I'm very strongly of the opinion that any elected member in Congress should be at the border and should know what's happening before they make any decision or have any inkling of thought of how to legislate.
Yeah, but not those staged photo ops where they all dress up like they're border agents and military people, look ridiculous.
Right.
So, David, we ask at Vote Common Good, we ask voters to use the common good as their voting criteria. And we ask people that are running for office that if they're elected, we ask them to use the common good as their governing criteria. I'm curious, like when you hear the phrase common good, how does that resonate with you? What does that mean to you?
Two things. The first thing is, in all of us, there's this inner sanctuary of, I'm not going to get all woo-woo or new agey or Christian-y or anything, but I really do believe that in all of us, we have this deep inner sense of intuition and moral compass.
Yeah.
And that we can really, it's a silent voice or a silent feeling, or an impression that we all can connect to if our thinking mind is quiet and we're able to really connect to that. And that common good is what I feel is what calls out to me when I heard that question. And from that common good, I think that common good, that inner peace, that intuition, moral compass, whatever you may call it, whether you're religious or irreligious, is present in everyone. And if we were to really connect to that, we wouldn't be living in this type of world or system that we have now, where people are suffering. There would be less suffering in that sense. And then the second thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is common good, common sense. What is common sense? Like, common sense is that nobody should be having to worry about what to eat, where to sleep, how to go see a doctor, the basic necessities of life, whether it be food, housing, healthcare, and the ability to make a living for yourself. And that should be essential and they're available for every single person in the US. Because if we're really a country that is claiming that we are all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then those should already be guaranteed, but it's not. And so I think that's what comes to mind when you say voting according to common good.
Yeah, love it. How do you stay positive in the midst of there's all the negative political stuff in general, and then there's just the challenges of life. How do you stay positive in the midst of it all?
Staying positive, I think it really comes down to, again, now you need to spend time with yourself, do the inner work, and all of that. But I think staying positive in terms of realizing that change is possible, so long as we're persistent about it, so long as we're deeply convicted about it. And time and history has shown that change is possible. If you have this deep conviction, if you have this persistence, then it will pay off. Where if you imagine kind of the fire spreading in a way where you have the more wood there is, the bigger the flame and fire can grow. And I think it's just a matter of really holding on to that conviction and spreading that to each person you meet, instilling into them that seed of hope, that fire, because that will grow. Because right now, Rob, I see the condition of our country as all of us right now, we're just zombies right now. The American people is a sleeping giant. And if we are woken up and the common good is woken up in us, we wouldn't even have the situation of, do we vote for Biden or Trump right now? And we would even go beyond those wouldn't be the issues we would be considering right now. But the American people is still sleeping right now, and so we need more activation of that. And so just kind of looking at that time and time again in the past, with the civil rights movement, with the women's movement, women's suffrage movement, with everything, eventually it all pays off. It's just about really believing in that and being persistent in that. And so that's what keeps my positivity going, because it's a cause and effect, this that's happening. So I'll keep it at that.
How can people find you, and how can they help?
Go check out davidkimforca.com. You can learn more about our campaign there, our values that we're standing for, and then you can sign up to our email list or join and sign up to volunteer as well.
Great. David, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate you.
And thanks everyone for listening in on this conversation with David Kim, candidate for the United States House of Representatives in California's 34th Congressional District. Conversations like this are happening every Wednesday between now and Election Day here on the Vote Common Good podcast network. You can learn more about David and all of our candidates for Common Good at candidatesforcommongood.com. And we'll see you next week.